I'm going to talk to you all about proactive and reactive game balance. My name is Rory Rackham. I've been working on Path of Exile for running new games for 6 or 7, 8 years, a very long time. And we regularly, that's wrong. We regularly release updates. It's an online ARPG. We have a pretty decently sized player base, and we keep that by releasing new content every 3 to 6 months. And so over the past 6 years, we've released so many regular updates, and almost all of them include new content that needs to be balanced-ish when it goes out. And then we release updates to balance on existing content that wasn't balanced-ish enough. And so there's a lot that I've learned over the years, and a lot of good decisions, a lot of bad decisions, so hopefully I can share some of the wisdom that I gathered at that time. We're not going to talk about the entire spectrum of balance, because there's a lot to it. We're not going to talk about the very base level of is the game easy or is it hard. That's another 40-minute talk, and possibly something I'm not as qualified to speak on, because we've had the game in a state where it is playable enough for such a long time that it's not really been an issue. What has been a problem for us is giving weight to different choices, making the balance between options the players are given feel reasonable. So for us, game balance is about giving equal weight to choices. So there is no such thing as perfect balance. If you're given 2 choices that are perfectly equal, then you're not actually being given a choice at all. You're being tricked into thinking you're given a choice, and as soon as the player realizes that choice had no consequence, then they're feeling like they're being lied to, or they're feeling like what they've done doesn't matter. And we want people to think what they're doing matters. So if we give them a weapon that has different attack speeds and damage, but it calculates as doing a certain amount of damage per second, and then we've got another weapon that does the exact same thing, and all of those other factors don't come into play at any point, then we've removed their choice, and effectively they've gone through it again without actually having any real input other than walking from A to B. Usually when people want a perfectly balanced game, this is what they think they want, but it's a trap. The opposite is an equally big problem in a whole different way, because if one choice is obviously great and one choice is obviously terrible, then it feels really bad because there is no choice as well. You have to take the good choice, or you're giving yourself a experience that is inferior. The majority of people feel like they can't take the bad choice. There are some people that do it because they're slightly masochistic, but that's good. But it doesn't really come into play for most people, and you were probably aware of this. This is what people are talking about when they say a game is badly balanced. They think that there are choices that are drastically superior, and that's what we get a lot in Path of Exile. People pick a choice, they've found a choice that they believe is much more efficient, much more effective than any other that are available to them. So what we want to do is find a comfortable middle ground between the two, where the correct choice isn't obvious. We want to hide the best choice, or make it so the best choice is very situational. In some situations, choice A is better, some situations, choice B is better, and you don't know how many of those situations will come across. So how do we go about creating these tough choices? The thing is, with a calculator, you can probably figure out the correct choice if you spend enough time going through all the options. Games do this with layers. We give you a choice, and then we give you another choice, and we give you another choice, and so on and so forth. And it'll get to the point where there are so many choices, and each of them interact with each other. You no longer know which choice is the best one at any one point, and you don't have the future information, you don't know everything that's going to happen to you, and it adds a lot of depth. So you can either go lateral, so you give the player lots of potential choices, or you can give them sequence of choices. If you give them lots of potential choices, then the players are going to have decision paralysis. They won't know where to start figuring out which one they should go with on a basic level. In a game of chess, you're given 2 different pieces you can start moving. If we gave you all of the pieces that you can move right from the start, you're not even going to know where to begin. The human brain can handle 6 or 7 different factors when determining a choice. So if your 2 choices have 3 variables each, you've filled up the brain's capacity to easily figure something out. You can make it a little trickier if you want people to sit down and think about it, but on a basic level, you want to keep it simple with each choice. So, as an example, we give the player 2 weapon choices right at the start of the game. And at the start of the game, maybe all they know is that the dagger does 3 damage and this 2-handed sword does 5 damage. But then they quickly figure out that the dagger attacks twice as fast. Now they begin calculating their choice might switch. What if the sword can hit multiple enemies? That brings a whole other dimension into the choice. And then they learn that the dagger has a chance to do double damage. Then they learn the sword has a chance to cause bleeding, ongoing damage, which is great for when you want to run around for a bit and watch a boss die. But you can learn the dagger can be thrown to take out foes at long range. There's a whole other dimension to it. And then the sword has benefits against enemies trying to block. We introduce these mechanics over time, we introduce these choices, let people go back and forth to this choice in this example. And this adds a lot of depth to it. And the player's original simple choice becomes something that they can no longer figure out. You can tell me, unless someone can tell me right now which of these options is better, but I'm guessing we'll need a bit of time to think about it. Especially once we introduce the fact that late in the game there are whole entirely new options that are available to you. The problem is, we've now created a system that is so complex that no player can easily figure out the answer, meaning we can no longer figure out the answer. We can't even begin to compare these 2 things, so we don't even know if the 3 damage and the 5 damage is right anymore. We've put ourselves in a tough situation. And this is why I call balance an art form, not a science, because you can make some educated guesses, but some of it will come down to having to experiment and use a few tricks. So here are some of the tricks that we try to include in choices that we present to people. We want to create choices that make balancing possible, but we also want to be an interesting choice for a player to make. So some of these factors are about enabling balance, some are about enabling better choices, but usually some combination of the two. So, choices apply differently in different situations. For example, if I give a player the option of taking a fire spell or an ice spell, I will then have enemies in the game that are resistant to fire and vulnerable to ice. And so now all of these choices matter in different situations. The player might just really hate fighting hot hounds, and so they decide that they're going to go with the cold spell to nullify the ability of the hot hounds. Or they might decide that they're going to be spending a lot of time in an area, they think they're going to be spending a lot of time in an area where they're going to be fighting a lot of enemies that are resistant to fire damage, so they're going to just go for the ice spell. Good choices open up new choices. On a basic level, the example of the chests, you have 2 choices to pick from. Maybe you know some likelihood of what's going to be in there, but when you open it up, you're getting new items that will open up new possibilities for your character. In a similar example, if we give people the choice of the dagger or the sword, we know that they're going to have access to dagger-only skills or sword-only skills later, and they can choose from within that subset. And we've added some depth to the choice because it affects future choices, and it also means that we've got more to balance with. Now we can balance the dagger skills individually if we want daggers to be weaker while keeping the base dagger the same, or have those options available for daggers at higher levels weaker if daggers are naturally stronger at higher levels. This comes at a price. Whenever you present a choice to someone and they take it, and then they find out that if they had known what was coming, if they had known that new abilities are available to them later, then we've got the other choice. They feel like they've been lied to, or they've been tricked. They've made a bad choice, and they didn't know that they could have made a better choice. So some games let you just go back on your choices. Most games let you go back on some of your choices, perhaps the most impactful ones that are really disruptive. But the more you do this, the more it takes away from the investment in that choice. When you feel like you've made a choice and you can't change it and it has positive consequences, then that feels really good. And it adds a lot of connection with your choices. Good choices will also affect behavior. If the player feels like by making this choice they now have to act differently, they need to take different actions, then they are going to be reminded of this choice constantly, every time something like that comes up. For example, if my character decides to pick up and equip some boots that let me slide over ice ground rather than be slowed down by it, every time I see a little patch of ice on the ground, I'm reminded of my choice. I'm excited to run onto the ice and slip across it, and that adds connection with your choice, and it changes up your game. It means that if players make different choices, they're going to end up having different experiences. Good choices are lenticular. Lenticular choice is it's a fancy design word that designers like to say to sound smart. It means that the choice is easy to understand. I can tell you what it is right away, and even as a fairly new player, you'll be like, oh, I know how to use that. But an experienced player looks at it and they think, oh, there are all these things I can do with it because I know the game well, because I'm smart. For example, we have a Mind Over Matter, which is a passive available to players in the game, which lets you take a portion of the damage you receive from your mana instead of your life. And for a new player, they're like, sweet, this is an extra defensive barrier. I can use my mana as a shield to protect me. For an experienced player, they're immediately thinking, okay, now I can use my life leech mechanics, or I can use my life recovery, or I can have some, get some life gain when I take damage, or I can focus on recovering mana constantly, and then that will let me use this much more efficiently than I otherwise would be able to. Adds a lot of depth. And probably most importantly, good choices have levers. If the designer is able to quickly tweak stuff on the skill, then they can rapidly experiment with it. This is both giving you, when you should be both getting lots of factors you can work with. For the weapons, we can modify the damage, and the speed, and the chance to do double damage, and the number of enemies hit, things like that. But we should also be making that accessible. When we are programming, developing the skill, having it so that it's quick to adjust that, it means you're saving yourself a lot of time and you're giving you the ability to iterate rapidly. The more factors you have, the more you can tweak to respond to a specific problem. If you find that your sword is not good enough against bosses, you can now just focus on just the bleeding part of it, rather than buffing the damage of the entire thing, making packs of monsters too easy. So, now that we've created our good choice, we can work on actually getting balanced. So we have a few different methods we rely on for this. These are just our top few methods, but there are plenty of other techniques. Anchors is one of the key ones, especially in a developed game or a genre that is well developed. Because if there's anything existing in our game that is similar to the newly introduced choice, then that's something we can balance in relation to. If I'm introducing a new fireball spell, and I've already got an ice bolt that is also a projectile, then I will take the damage of the ice bolt to start with, and then I'll say, okay, the ice bolt passes through enemies, that is an advantage that the fireball doesn't have, so I'm going to say 20% more damage on the fireball, because I think that then pushes the advantage towards single targets. But I also want my fireball to explode and hit nearby enemies, so that's going to reduce, let's say, the speed that it flies at, so that you can take out groups more effectively with one cast, but get less of those individual casts. You start adjusting factors relative to the differences, rather than a blind guess on how much you think it should be worth from a point of zero information. If you focus on the key differences, then it is fairly easy to figure out how these values should be determined to start with. And as we kind of alluded to before, you can support your choices with other choices. If the choice alone has very little impact, then rather than just making it do more damage or grow more powerful naturally as you level up, instead you introduce choices along the line. This is especially effective if you find out that the mechanic is great early on in the game, but the further you progress through the game, the less exciting it becomes, the less powerful and useful it becomes. So then we introduce new factors as we go that enhance it. If you've created choices that influence the power of the primary choice, then you can now adjust those to balance the effect in addition to the primary skill. And then the part all this humans come in, you experience an experiment. Obviously you have to test your choice out and see if it works. And this is the only way you know if your assumptions are correct. And doing this, you start to learn whether the choices you made in the previous few steps were accurate. That's how you get better at those first few steps through testing it out. You need to get others to test it as well, but you can't trust your own opinion, and you can't trust anyone else's opinion for different reasons. You can't trust yourself because you've become attached to it. You like one version of it. You are ignoring the flaws because you liked the benefits so much, but many people couldn't see past those flaws. And you can't really trust anyone else, especially if you've asked them for feedback. If you tell someone to give you feedback, they'll pick out something bad with it, even if that thing is so unimportant and so irrelevant to the actual experience, the skill, that it wouldn't have even been brought up by anyone naturally playing the game. They wouldn't have noticed it. Everyone that you work with has a different way of giving feedback. So going back to the same person who's given you feedback before, you'll very quickly learn their patterns, their preferences, the things they just ignore. Some people might not care about how their skill looks at all. They'll just care about whether it lowers the life bar by the right amount. If you've got something that attacks really fast, some players are just naturally hateful of something that's sort of really sort of taking little bits at a time. They just want big, chunky removal at once. So learning about the people that give you feedback gives you better feedback. And then you do this over and over and over again. There's no real answer for how many times you should do it. You kind of got to learn, get a feel for it, but it will never be enough. Firstly, you'll have trouble remaining impartial yourself. You'll just prefer the previous version, or you'll be like, I don't want to work on it anymore. I don't want to tweak something that I feel is the most fun I've had with it. But you often need to just make a huge paradigm shift. If you can easily tweak the values, say, I'm just going to double its damage in half how often I can do it, and see how that feels, then you start to get fresh perspectives. This is the way to refresh your way of thinking about it. But no matter how much you do something like this, you can't be right. You've just got to keep going until it's as not wrong as you possibly can in the time you have to do. If you have unlimited time, then give yourself limited time, otherwise this will keep going on indefinitely. And eventually it's too late. It'll always be at a state when it goes out that you wish you'd spent more time on it, especially if you can't work on it for the last day because it's being tested and it's going in the patching process. That day is the worst because then you find all the problems. Then you realise, I should have just started again. Or maybe you find out a day later once people start giving feedback on it. So either way, it's always going to feel like it's too late. If at any point it doesn't feel like it's too late, that you've got it right, that you're comfortable with how it fits in the game, then you've got too cocky. You need to question yourself more, or have other people listen to other people when they were questioning you. And at this point, the content is released into the world. This is when true players will begin interacting with it. True players being people who have no investment in your game other than their own enjoyment. They don't want to make a game that sells to people, they want a game that they can play. And these people have thoughts and feelings, sometimes sadly, and they also have opinions. And a minority, a very small minority, perhaps 5 or 10% of people will share what they think with you. Sometimes it's only 1 or 2%, and then another 8% will parrot what that 2% said because it sounds smart. Which is important. This is a good thing, even if they're saying bad things, because there will be aggressive negative opinions. The better your game is, the more aggressive negative opinions you'll have, because many people won't hold back, they won't have filters, and in their vision for the game, the mechanical choice was different. They had something in mind. When you said you get to shoot lightning from their hands, they imagined you're shooting it across the room and it's exploding everything, rather than a low-level spell that just zaps people a bit until you get the better spells later. They'll always want something different. They imagined the perfect game for them in their mind, and they're upset because they care so much. They're upset because you've missed out on an opportunity that they saw. They just have a really bad way of showing it, which is fine. Because, well, you can take on their feedback, and you need to do this, because even if it's completely wrong, your judgment of what's right or wrong, it's what the players are feeling, and it's what they're telling each other. Which, I mean, let's be honest, we want to make some money from our game so that we can keep making it. So we need to control what the community is thinking. We need to care about what the community is thinking and react to it. So you need to get into the habit of breaking down their feedback into the important chunks. Figure out exactly what they're trying to say. Figure out what is actually causing them to say the thing that they're trying to say. And then consider if any of those points are valid. Some of those points might be not really something that matters. It's just something they've picked out because they wanted to find flaws, or they think they've found a flaw, but it doesn't actually impact on their long-term experience. Maybe the benefits of that problem outweigh the problems of the problem. And consider for the rest of them whether there are potential solutions. It might be that the fix to whatever they're doing requires scrapping half the code of the skill and having the programmer start again, and the effects artist start again, and you just can't put them through that. Or just really time-consuming to make the changes they want. So you discard the ones that you can't solve, take on the ones that you can, and move on. And try and keep your spirits up while you're doing it. It is really disheartening to be told you're wrong over and over again by a huge number of people. From personal experience, maybe you like it, I don't know. But keeping your attitude positive, keeping you wanting to make new content. There's some days after I've released a skill where it's like, it's my last skill that I'm ever putting in the game. In that case, no matter what I do. But then a few days after, I'm like, I've got a new idea for a skill. It's going to be the best. There are some things that can only be learned from the community. The net hours that people will spend working with your content, playing with your content, will be much higher than anything you could do yourself, even if they're pretty terrible testers and they're not really playing the correct way, the way that the experienced players are playing, the way that you would have played it, the way that's actually going to be more fun for them if they just take the longer road. But that's important information. This is when patterns emerge. You take all the data that you have access to, or the feedback you have access to, if that's not an option, and look where the patterns are. If you can see that 85% of your players are taking this one choice over the 4 other options, then you need to consider, do you need to change that choice in some way? Because that choice probably isn't a choice at that point. You've fallen into the trap of creating the obvious choice. So now that we've learned that there's an improvement to be made, the question is, should it be made? It's tempting to say yes, given infinite time and resources. Of course, we'll make the game the best it can be. But we don't have infinite time and resources. Development has a cost. The time could be spent on bigger, better content in the future, or something new and similar and perhaps higher level that solves the problems that this thing has. Perhaps rushing out a fix would upset the community. People will lose interest in the game because they got to play with something insane and awesome, the best thing the game has ever released, that you destroy everything in the level with one spellcast. But now that it's gone, it feels like the game is just so slow and boring again. They love that feeling of teleporting across the level in half a second. They'll never be able to let it go, and the game will never be the same as the hour after releasing that new spell that destroyed everything. Sometimes you can release new content that fixes it, which is usually the case if something isn't strong enough in some situations. For example, if my summon go to skill is great early on in the mountainous areas, obviously, but later on in the flat expanses, it really doesn't hold up. No one continues using it, they switch to something else. Then you can introduce a new content, say a skill for the goat that lets them charge around, and that's only available at higher levels, so it would be too powerful early on. But adding something like this is generally cheaper than starting from scratch with a new ability, and adds a lot of depth to the skill that previously wasn't there. It adds something exciting for players to look forward to. What I've suggested just now isn't really a choice. It's something that player has to take if they want to be good at that point, but it's so important that it's necessary. It's fine, later on maybe you can introduce different ways for goats to travel. I don't know why we're talking about goats, but it's fine. In a competitive environment, you have the option of counters if something is powerful. You'll see this all the time in card games where some spell in Hearthstone is dominating all the decks, and so they introduce a specific card that destroys a category of spells that spell happens to fall into, and that lets you fix the problem by every time someone finds it's a problem for them, they are like, it's okay, I have a way to fix it, I have a way for it not to be a problem anymore. This means that you don't need to nerf the mechanic that people are enjoying in a direct way, where the players feel like you're taking something away from them. But unless you add a little bit of new content, it does, however, feel like the game becomes much more cerebral at that point, where they've got to be thinking again, which might put some players off. They feel like they're being countered all the time. Speaking of buffs and nerfs, should you make a mechanic better or bring other mechanics up to the level? If you've got a powerful mechanic and you nerf it, then you're taking something that players enjoy away. You're reducing the power of something that they thought was awesome and that made the game feel faster and better, and that made them feel stronger. And that feels really bad when someone takes that away from you. So the other option is bringing other mechanics up to the same level as the powerful new mechanic, so that everything feels that you're that awesome and that powerful. But this is very expensive, because not only does it cost more development and testing time, because now every one of those buffed mechanics needs to be adjusted, you've also just increased the size of the numbers in your game, and you've made the game faster. People will be progressing through it faster. If you compare the initial release of Path of Exile, people were killing 3 or 4 monsters at a time and walking around at what feels today like a snail's pace. Well, now if you look at players taking on maps, they're blitzing through the area at incredible speed, jumping around and destroying entire packs of low-level monsters instantaneously. And they can never give that up now. There's no way that anyone would be satisfied with us saying, we've shrunk the size of every spell by half, we've lowered its damage by half, we've made monsters tougher to compensate, we've made them drop less items so that you progress less quickly through the game. That's all stuff that's creeped up that we can never go back on without losing most of our player base. So nothing is preferable if people will be okay with it. The more you do it, the more you get the memes coming of you just ruining everything that's fun in the game. So sometimes you have to live with your problems and sometimes you don't. There's always going to be a minority of players that want things to stay the way they are now. They're happy with how other things are, and anything you change feels different. They might want no new content in the game. That's the sort of level of happiness they are. They've got a game that they're comfortable with, that they understand the entirety of, or as much as they feel like they need to. Every time you add something more or change something existing, they're lost at sea again. But you need to manage the expectations, because you do need to keep making changes if you want to keep the game feeling fresh and new. It has a net positive effect if your game feels like it's constantly evolving. You'll get more enjoyment from your players in the long run, and you just need to keep those people that like things the way they are, even just one aspect of the game the way it is, happy as best you can by telling them changes are coming. Get mentally prepared that anything you enjoy is going to be ruined. I mean, slightly. So, a good example of this is some changes we made in Path of Exile to our poison and ignite system, where some skills and abilities could cause damage over time. And the way that the game's calculations worked meant that increases to fire damage sort of applied twice to the ignite. If you had a 10% fire damage increase, it applied to the hit, and the ignite caused by the hit, and then again to the ignite's actual burning damage. Meaning a 10% damage increase was a 21% damage increase for these abilities, which was problematic for obvious reasons, because now we had to balance those fire damage increases around the fact that they were actually 21% when they said 10%. Very confusing for a new player, and very upsetting for us every time we lowered the values. So we had to change the system entirely. But this was a very expensive change. There were a lot of programming time behind it, and a lot of balance time to come following that. So we couldn't do it in one of our small 3-month patches. And players started off saying, "This is so fun, I can play any build, I just slap on some poison, and then I can win all the content. No worries." But the more time went on, the more they got upset that they were tired of slapping poison on everything they played. They just wanted to play some builds that were decent for other reasons. They didn't feel like they had to play poison or ignite to get ahead of the curve. So when we finally made that change, everyone was all excited until they actually got to play with it and were like, we're not destroying instantly with poison at all anymore. That's upsetting. Well, but it turned into it was good while it lasted feeling after a while. So managing community, our biggest problem with that was that we didn't tell people early enough about the specific changes we were making as we made them. As we continued to iterate on the balance, we should have just kept people abreast of every single tweak. And we were just too busy with all the other content we were making to regularly update it. So, that's all the things that I know. So remember, finding balance isn't about creating equal choices. It's about creating equal-ish choices, as best anyone can tell. Layers of choices help us do this by obscuring the right answer and go vertical rather than horizontal, give people sequences of choices rather than multi-option choices. Good choices are relative, they open up more choices, they affect behavior, they're lenticular. You remember what that means. And have levers. And use anchors, supporting choices and testing all together to determine the balance. Probably most importantly, take on the feedback, but understand it should not always be taken at face value. This is easy to say, but it is something that takes years and is almost impossible to master. No one is going to give you reliable feedback every time, even reliably unreliable feedback. And consider carefully before making reactive balance changes, because there are always consequences. That's all. We have time for questions. Anyone wants to know? Bye.
You talk about how you have obscuring choices and make it difficult to play with what to do. Do you have any thoughts on at some point it becomes too difficult and players kind of give up and they just follow the guide or build that someone else solve the problem?
Because Path of Exile is so old, I guess. It has so many choices introduced over time. This is something we almost rely on. At first, it's kind of, players understand and they tell new players when someone posts something new to the game, any advice. Their first advice is go through the game and make a bunch of mistakes and take the wrong choices. Because we're constantly trying to add new content, we rarely have time to make it clear or improve or remove choices that are traps. Instead, we have to rely on players eventually teaching each other. So they'll say, go through the game once on a fresh character, make horrible mistakes, go through with a build guide, maybe a couple of build guides. Now you know how to make that kind of character, you can start to generate your own character. It's not the best solution. We absolutely lose players that make horrible choices early because they don't have the information, and that's something we regret all the time, that we can't spend more time going through and clearing out the clutter, I guess. So, yes, that is a problem, but one that the game's so deep now, it's too tricky to fix.
I was curious about how you get feedback for those skills. Like, do you have play sessions with your coworkers, or do you go out to each individual person and ask them? Do you have test servers?
We have, so on our QA team is also sort of our balance team in a lot of ways. They're all experienced players. They spend half the time not working on the game, playing the game, so they have all the experience, and they have specialities. Some of them are really good at minion characters, and some of them are good at doing the properly established builds really effectively. And so going to individuals, knowing what their skill set is the biggest advantage we have. Getting feedback from people outside our team, we rely heavily on Reddit and forums and our community managers to say, I'm getting all these emails about this thing. And that's how we get that info. But from within the team is a matter of, sometimes we bring all the guys in and we say, okay, you've all played around with this thing, what do you think? But there are usually at that point only one or two people that actually give information, and then everyone nods because they know those people are most experienced with that system. So the one or two people are, generally if you get all the people in the room, then you lose a lot of potential information because people don't want to disagree with people they know it probably worked better. Yep.
How would you say it works for single player balance as opposed to multiplayer?
Single player balance versus multiplayer. When you're talking about multiplayer, you mean people playing together or against each other?
Either. I can see balance, slightly different forms of balance would be equally important for both.
Yeah, we focus on single player balance first. We want you to have a controlled experience, and generally we compensate for any major problems that come up in multiplayer balance because the majority of our players are single player players. Honestly, the game is a lot easier if you have a group of skilled people, and a lot harder if you have a group of people who don't know what they're doing and run off in all directions. And there's no fix for that without killing people if they walk too far away from each other and letting them know that's why it happened. So the level of difficulty in the content adjusts very slightly to compensate for extra players, but it's perceived as the right way to play most content. And this is also something that the game is so fixed in place. If we change that now, if we made it so that the game is just as difficult against a group as with a single person, then those groups are going to feel like the game is being destroyed for them because they no longer have the cruisy ride where they can let some tough guy go in front and they can stand in the back as a glass cannon and do all the work. In terms of PvP, it's such a small subset of our community that we solve the balance problems that come up with it. If there's a certain mechanic that just bypasses common player resists, then we'll find some way to change it so it doesn't and solve specific issues or introduce counters.
I was specifically thinking for exclusively single player content, there could be intentionally weaker mechanics as long as they were explained to be weaker.
Explaining mechanics to players is something that we find tricky because a lot of players don't read or don't care about that information, if it's not
Good point.
actively killing them. We've got a passive in our tree that says if you do no damage, but you get a small benefit, and we get constant forum posts on our help forum saying that my character is stopping damage. I have no idea why.
Wow.
So, despite it being in big bold letters. So, getting information across to people is something that we have to, like, almost all of our boss fights are designed so that you can kind of just run in there and swing and hope, and eventually you'll win. As long as you're doing damage to something at some point, it's going to be impossible. There's no puzzles you need to solve while you're under threat. We just make sure that you have a big advantage if you do manage to figure it out. You've kind of won at that point. I don't know if that answers your single player question so much, but...
Okay, so you wouldn't make anything deliberately weaker. People will do that themselves by not being entirely optimized.
Yeah, deliberately weaker is... We're constantly making things deliberately weaker if we think players won't be able to figure it out. I guess is the thing. If we think that the consequences are too harsh considering the investment that players put in. If they're just wanting to do a random sub-boss fight, that sub-boss is going to do less damage than the final boss, because we don't want players to feel like they have to play their game at the big boss. If that makes any sense. When it comes to final bosses and encounters, then you don't really pull any punches at that point. You're expected to die a few times if you don't figure anything out. But the costs for dying seem to get lower and lower every few patches, just because if people die over and over, they tend to leave before they've learnt what's going on, and they just don't have fun. And the experienced players still enjoy it because they feel like they didn't get any deaths at all. They didn't lose anything. They succeeded in that regard.
And I'm still thinking on some level that it's as difficult as originally. That the consequences for failing are still equally high.
We have the advantage of having a hardcore league, where if you die, then your character is shifted to a less prestigious standard league. So we have this challenge that doesn't affect the game in any other way. There's no benefits for being in this hardcore league, but we've given players the hard mode, the difficulty where all the actions have real consequences, and usually they just delete their character as soon as it's died because it's worth nothing to them anymore. So luckily we've got that artificial difficulty that people choose to put on themselves just so they cool red hardcore banner next to their character.
Only time for a very quick question.
Okay, quick question? Anyone? Yep.
How do you think of or balance the between like new players and skilled players, because they often treat different mechanics quite differently?
New players versus experienced players balance. There are some natural systems in the game, like the fact that if you die, you're pushed back to an earlier point, you get to play through content again, you might be getting some extra loot in the process. So a new player ends up being slightly stronger against the content than an experienced player. But it's come to be expected that an experienced player will breeze through the early game, and when they get to the late game, that's when the real challenge comes in. The point a new player hits a brick wall and they feel like they have to look at a guide or get good. That curve is clear to them. We have it, so the maps, when you get to that point, have a red symbol on them, and you know they're going to be dangerous. So it's something we let players know when they're about to jump into the game. Yep, I think that's all we have time for. Thanks.